Imagine this. You wake up one morning with the impossible ability to see truth, raw, unfiltered, and merciless. You can't turn it off. You see through people's smiles, through your own rationalizations, through every comforting story that kept your world coherent. Overnight, the world loses its pleasant blur. The faces you trusted reveal quiet desperation. The relationships you idealized expose their silent bargains. Even the mirror becomes unbearable, because for the first time, you see yourself without narrative, without excuse, without the scaffolding of identity that once held you together. How long could you last in that kind of clarity before you start craving the fog again? Humans claim to love truth, but the truth is indifferent. It has no warmth, no comfort, no promise. It strips away illusions, but it offers nothing in their place. It tells you that love is often projection, that success is frequently accident, that morality is convenience wearing a mask of virtue. It tells you that everything you call meaning is something you invented to endure the unbearable silence of existence. And that's why the mind creates lies, not as errors, but as medicine. The lie is not a flaw in the human design. It is the very mechanism that makes the design possible. You believe that your life has purpose, that your suffering has meaning, that justice will eventually prevail. These are not empirical truths. They are adaptive delusions. They are stories that keep you alive in a world that doesn't care whether you are or not. Without them, the weight of reality would crush the psyche like glass under gravity. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said that humans are condemned to be free. Freedom sounds noble, but in truth it is terrifying, because it means there is no script, no cosmic referee, no guarantee that what you do matters. So the mind does what any frightened creature would. It invents shelter. It constructs systems of belief, moral codes, social hierarchies, and personal myths to turn chaos into order. You don't just live inside a body, you live inside a narrative. And that narrative is, inevitably, part lie. Carl Jung called it the necessary fiction. The persona you wear, the competent, stable, socially acceptable version of yourself, is not your true self, but without it, the world would devour you. Every role you play, every mask you maintain, protects something vulnerable beneath. The irony is that the more you believe the mask, the more it begins to believe in you. So here lies the paradox. The lie is both poison and cure. It disconnects you from reality, yet it shields you from despair. It limits your perception, yet it allows you to act. The question isn't whether you live with lies, it's whether you know which ones are keeping you alive and which ones are killing you slowly. Modern psychology quietly agrees. Studies in positive illusion theory show that mentally healthy individuals often hold slightly distorted views of themselves. They overestimate control, underestimate failure, and reinterpret memories in ways that preserve optimism. The truth, left alone, can paralyze. Illusion gives motion. The mind trades accuracy for survival. Imagine, then, a world where every human suddenly abandoned their necessary illusions. The conviction that love will last, that their lives have meaning, that death is not the end. Civilization would collapse within a week. Without lies, no one would go to work, raise a child, or make art. Without stories, no one would bear the monotony of existence. The whole of culture, religion, politics, entertainment, is humanity's collective hallucination of purpose. And maybe that isn't a tragedy. Maybe it's an act of creative defiance. Still, something inside you resists. You sense that some lies are worth outgrowing, that truth, even if painful, can be liberating. But how do you know which lies are necessary and which are cages? At what point does protection become imprisonment? That's the great question. If lies are the price of survival, how much truth can you afford before it destroys you? And if you decide to open your eyes, even just a little, what happens to the world you thought you knew? The answer, as you'll see, lies buried in the strange psychology of self-deception, where the mind plays both victim and architect. To understand why the human mind needs illusion, we must first understand what truth does to it. Truth, in its rawest form, dismantles coherence. It erases the stories that make experience tolerable. And the psyche, fragile, meaning-dependent, cannot survive in a vacuum of narrative. So it builds scaffolding even from fiction. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He wrote that modern people suffer not from lack of comfort but from lack of meaning. The unconscious, he believed, is not some dark pit of primal instinct. It is a living system that hungers for pattern. It seeks to impose symbolic order on chaos, to weave fragments of reality into something bearable. But when that instinct for order meets the vast indifference of the universe, the only materials available are myths, beliefs, and lies. The lie, then, is not moral failure. It is psychological necessity. Consider a newborn's world. It begins as a blur of sensation, light, sound, touch. No boundaries, no self, no story. The infant slowly constructs an internal model of reality, first by recognizing the mother, then the home, then its own name. Every truth it learns is, in fact, an approximation, a simplification that filters infinite complexity into something the brain can manage. Cognitive science calls this reductionism. The mind doesn't show you the world as it is, but as it needs to be for you to function. Perception itself is a benevolent lie. Philosophers have circled this realization for centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche declared, "We have art so that we shall not die of the truth." He saw clearly that consciousness is both miracle and curse, aware enough to perceive the void, but desperate enough to decorate it with beauty and meaning. To live without illusion, he warned, is to stand forever on the edge of the abyss, staring into nothingness. Most people cannot bear that sight for long. Arthur Schopenhauer, his grim predecessor, described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Desire torments us until fulfilled. Fulfillment leads to emptiness. His conclusion was bleak. Non-existence, he claimed, would be preferable. But nature doesn't allow such luxury. Life insists on itself. And so, evolution provides anesthesia in the form of illusion, hope, ambition, love, identity, all comforting distortions that make endurance possible. Even Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, wrote that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. The why does not need to be objectively true, it only needs to feel true. Meaning, even if constructed, sustains life more effectively than accuracy ever could. Yet here is where the problem begins. The same mechanism that protects the psyche also enslaves it. Because when a lie works too well, it stops feeling like a lie. The stories we invent to endure suffering gradually harden into dogmas. The personal myth becomes identity, and identity becomes prison. The religion that once offered solace begins to demand obedience. The career that once gave purpose becomes a chain around the neck. The relationship built on comfort becomes a pact of mutual avoidance. The lie mutates from a shield into a shroud. Psychologically, this process is called ego identification. The ego, Jung explained, is the small portion of the psyche that consciousness calls I. It is essential for navigation, but it cannot tolerate contradiction. So when reality threatens the ego's narrative, defense mechanisms activate: denial, projection, repression. These are not conscious choices but automatic reflexes. Freud compared the mind to a government-suppressing revolt. Truth is the insurgent, repression the police. In modern life, these mechanisms are everywhere. We deny our anxiety by calling it ambition. We project our insecurities onto others and call it judgment. We repress our anger and call it politeness. Each layer of self-deception helps us maintain coherence, but at a cost. The further we drift from reality, the more hollow we feel. The self becomes a performance sustained by exhaustion. And this exhaustion is spiritual as much as psychological. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the tendency to lie to oneself to avoid the terror of freedom. We pretend that our roles define us: parent, worker, believer, patriot. They keep us safe from the truth that beneath the labels, we are frighteningly free, and therefore frighteningly responsible. But consciousness is restless. It knows, even in silence, that something about this stability is artificial. The mask starts to itch. The soul begins to whisper that survival without authenticity is not living but enduring. This is the paradox that defines human existence. The same illusions that make life possible eventually make it unbearable. We crave truth when the lie begins to suffocate us, but we fear it when it threatens our fragile order. Humanity lives forever suspended between these poles: comfort and chaos, delusion and awareness, safety and freedom. And so the real question is not why we lie, but how we might begin to see through our necessary illusions without disintegrating. How do we outgrow the lie without losing the will to live? To answer that, we must examine what happens when these fictions begin to break, when reality intrudes, and the mind can no longer hold its own story together. That collapse, painful as it is, reveals something essential about the human condition. Lies have a strange metabolism. At first, they serve you, then they start to consume you. What begins as protection turns into dependence, and the boundary between the two erodes until you can no longer tell where comfort ends and control begins. The very stories that once saved you become the invisible architecture of your suffering. You can feel this architecture in your daily life. It's in the polite laughter you force at work meetings, in the filtered smiles on social media, in the exhausted insistence that everything's fine. Beneath those gestures, a quiet despair hums. The more we deny it, the louder it becomes. The mind can repress awareness, but the body remembers the truth. Sleeplessness, anxiety, chronic tension, these are the whispers of a truth trying to return through the cracks in our necessary illusions. Carl Jung warned that what you resist not only persists but grows stronger. The repressed material of the psyche doesn't vanish, it reorganizes. Each unacknowledged truth becomes a fragment of what he called the shadow, the unseen side of the self containing everything the ego refuses to integrate. The more we identify with the lie, the larger the shadow grows, and eventually, it starts to rule from below. In individuals, this manifests as self-sabotage, the inexplicable urge to destroy what we claim to love. In societies, it manifests as collective delusion, the willful blindness of crowds. The same psychology governs both scales, differing only in scope. A civilization, after all, is merely a collection of shared fictions. Every culture teaches its citizens which truths to see and which to ignore. It's a survival mechanism on a grand scale. We call it ideology. And like any illusion, ideology begins as a tool of coherence. It unites people under common myths of progress, justice, or identity. But when the myth ossifies, when it stops evolving with reality, it becomes dogma. Then the system must defend the lie at all costs, because the lie has become the structure itself. History is littered with examples. Entire empires built on divine right. Economies sustained by denial of exploitation. Nations forged on myths of purity. Each believed its story to be absolute truth. Each collapsed under the weight of what it refused to see. The lie is never stable. It must constantly feed on belief to survive. And belief, like oxygen, eventually runs out. The same pattern plays out within the individual psyche. When your internal myth stops matching reality, cracks appear. You start to feel alien in your own life, haunted by the sense that you're playing a part in someone else's play. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the tension between what you believe and what you experience. But beyond the technical term lies something far more existential, the slow unraveling of meaning itself. When people reach this threshold, they often seek distraction rather than introspection. Modern culture obliges. Infinite entertainment, endless consumption, curated personas, each promises to fill the void left by the dying illusion. But distraction is only the digital form of denial. The more stimulation we seek, the more numb we become, and the more unbearable silence grows. The tragedy of the lie is not that it deceives you, but that it drains your vitality. To maintain falsehood, the mind must split itself in two, one part that knows, another that pretends not to. That division is exhausting. It produces the dull fatigue that so many mistake for depression. It's not sadness, it's the cost of constant self-surveillance. The soul grows tired of its own performance. And yet, there is an even deeper consequence, one few dare to name. The longer you live within illusion, the more you forget what freedom feels like. The comfort of certainty becomes addictive. the thought of truth begins to resemble danger. In this way, the lie doesn't just protect you from reality, it reshapes your desires so that you no longer want reality at all. You stop asking questions. You stop feeling wonder. You trade curiosity for stability, vitality for control. Nietzsche called this the death of the spirit. He saw it in the complacency of his age, the moral exhaustion of people who believed in progress yet felt nothing but despair. He warned that the greatest danger to humanity was not chaos, but comfort, the slow suicide of those who refuse to look beyond the veil. The ultimate irony is that we begin lying to survive but end up surviving only to sustain the lie. We create illusions to protect life, and in return, life becomes the servant of illusion. The more successful the deception, the more fragile we become. It's as if the human spirit must always choose between two forms of suffering, the pain of truth or the anesthesia of falsehood. Most choose the anesthesia, but somewhere within, a quiet awareness resists extinction. It flickers like a candle in a sealed room, consuming the last of its own oxygen. That faint light, the longing for authenticity, never fully dies. It waits for the moment when the illusion collapses, when the cost of pretending finally exceeds the fear of seeing. That collapse, though terrifying, is not the end. It is the beginning of rebellion, the point where the human being, cornered by its own lies, finally dares to ask, what if I stopped running? What if truth, no matter how cruel, is the only thing that can make me whole again? The moment of rebellion never arrives gently. It comes disguised as exhaustion, heartbreak, loss, or a quiet sense that life has become too small for you. Something inside snaps, not in rage but in clarity. You realize that your suffering no longer comes from the chaos of the world but from the structures you built to avoid it. The cage isn't out there, it's the narrative in your own head. That's where rebellion begins, not in the streets, but in the psyche. Breaking free from illusion does not mean rejecting every comfort or tearing down every belief. It means learning to see which lies serve life and which ones steal it. It means distinguishing between anesthesia and meaning. To rebel, in the truest sense, is to turn consciousness back upon itself, to become aware of your own conditioning, to look directly at the stories you tell and ask, who wrote them? And why do I still believe them? Carl Jung called this process individuation, the slow, painful integration of all the parts of the psyche that have been split apart by self-deception. It requires confronting the shadow, the fears, desires, and truths buried under the persona you've spent a lifetime protecting. To meet the shadow is to stand before the mirror without costume. It is not enlightenment that awaits there, but terror. You see what you've been running from. You understand that your greatest enemy has always been your own avoidance. But here's the paradox. The moment you face the shadow, it begins to lose its power. Because the truth, when finally acknowledged, is rarely as unbearable as the fear of it. Fear multiplies in darkness. It dissolves in light. Philosophically, rebellion against illusion is a spiritual act. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the Overman, was not a conqueror of others, but of the self. He is one who dares to create new values in the absence of divine authority, who can stare into the abyss without blinking and still choose to dance. Become who you are, Nietzsche wrote, not as an invitation to ego but to courage, to accept the chaos of being and shape it consciously, rather than be shaped by it unconsciously. This kind of rebellion has nothing to do with destruction. It's a reordering of priorities. It means choosing awareness over comfort, growth over repetition. It means accepting that truth will break things, relationships, careers, versions of yourself, but trusting that what survives will be real. Of course, the psyche resists. Denial feels safer than discovery. But the cost of safety is stagnation. When you dare to peel away illusion, you invite chaos. Yes, but chaos is the birthplace of new order. The forest must burn before it can renew itself. So must the psyche. Rebellion begins quietly. You start noticing the scripts you recite automatically. The fake enthusiasm, the polite avoidance, the habitual distraction. You begin catching yourself mid-performance. And instead of returning to the lie, you pause. That pause is revolution in miniature. It is consciousness reclaiming territory from automation. At first, this awareness hurts. You see how much of your life has been theater. You realize how much energy you've spent maintaining an image instead of living. Many people stop there. They retreat, overwhelmed by disillusionment. But if you keep going, something remarkable happens. Beneath the rubble of performance, you start to sense a pulse. The unmanufactured self. The part of you that existed before the stories. Rebellion, then, is not about replacing old lies with new ones. It's about learning to live with truth's discomfort. It's about building a self flexible enough to hold contradiction, open enough to face uncertainty. Freedom is not the absence of illusion. It's the capacity to walk through illusion without being owned by it. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, "To become free, you must be willing to be misunderstood." That's the price of authenticity. When you stop performing, you break the unspoken contracts that bind society's comfort. People who live inside lies will call you lost. They will say you've changed. And they'll be right, you have. But what you've lost is only what was never truly yours. From this vantage point, even pain transforms. It no longer feels like punishment but purification. Each confrontation with truth becomes an act of alignment, each moment of disillusionment a step toward integrity. The goal is not to destroy illusion, but to see through it, to hold both the fiction and the fact in the same hand without confusing the two. In that balance lies maturity, the ability to live in a world built on necessary lies while remaining loyal to the truth within yourself. It's a constant negotiation, not a final victory. And yet, there comes a moment, a strange stillness, when the rebellion softens. The need to fight dissolves into understanding. You no longer resent the lie, you simply see it for what it is, a beautiful fiction that once kept you alive. Gratitude replaces hatred. Awareness replaces denial. And from that awareness, a deeper kind of truth begins to emerge, one that doesn't shatter meaning, but illuminates it. When all illusions fall away, something unexpected happens. You don't find despair waiting there, you find silence. It's a silence so total that it feels like standing at the edge of existence, where every question dissolves before it's even formed. You realize that truth was never a set of facts but a state of being. An openness so vast that the mind, used to categories and control, cannot contain it. In that silence, you understand why humanity invented lies. Because the truth, in its purest form, is too vast to hold. It's not cruel nor kind, it simply is. It doesn't promise meaning, doesn't grant reward, doesn't care whether you love or suffer. It reflects everything but comforts nothing. And yet, when you stop resisting it, that indifference starts to feel like peace. The final realization is this: the lie you needed to survive was never the enemy. It was a bridge. Without it, you could never have crossed the abyss of unknowing. Every illusion, of self, of purpose, of love, was scaffolding that let you climb high enough to see beyond it. The lie served life, and once its purpose was fulfilled, it could be released. The tragedy is not in believing the lie, it's in refusing to outgrow it. Carl Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The journey through illusion is exactly that, the descent into your own unconscious, where the false and the real mingle indistinguishably. Enlightenment, then, is not the eradication of illusion but the intimacy with it. You see through your stories, but you also see why they mattered. You recognize that even your mistakes were forms of intelligence, attempts by the psyche to keep itself intact. To live truthfully is not to discard illusion altogether. It's to dance with it consciously. You can still love the myths, still enjoy the stories, still believe in beauty and meaning, just without demanding that they be absolute. You understand now that truth and illusion are not enemies but partners in creation. Reality needs imagination to be experienced. Imagination needs reality to be grounded. Life itself is the dialogue between the two. Philosophers have gestured toward this reconciliation for centuries. Schopenhauer found fleeting redemption in art, the moment when the will, burdened by suffering, pauses to contemplate beauty. Nietzsche transformed nihilism into affirmation, urging humanity to say yes to existence despite its absence of cosmic justification. And Viktor Frankl discovered meaning not in denying pain but in transforming it into purpose. Each, in their own way, saw that truth alone is unbearable unless tempered by the human capacity to create meaning. What this means for you is profound. You will never escape illusion entirely, and you don't need to. The goal is not purity, it's integration. You can hold both the comfort of story and the clarity of truth. You can live honestly within fiction, knowing it's fiction. That awareness is freedom. And from that freedom, compassion emerges. You begin to see that everyone you meet is negotiating their own necessary lies. The mother who believes her sacrifices will save her children, the friend who hides behind jokes to avoid pain, the stranger who clings to certainty because doubt would unravel him. You stop judging their illusions because you recognize them as cousins of your own. You realize that to be human is to walk through a shared hallucination, fragile, fleeting, but somehow beautiful. This compassion changes the texture of your life. You start listening differently. You speak with more honesty but less cruelty. You tell the truth not as a weapon but as an offering. You no longer demand that the world be real in order for it to be meaningful. You find meaning in the act of perceiving itself. And then, quietly, you understand the deepest paradox of all. You no longer need the lie to survive, because you've learned to survive truth. This is the point where the old self dissolves. The roles, the fears, the compulsive search for certainty, they fall away, not through force but through irrelevance. You discover that truth was never something to be owned, only experienced. It moves through you like wind through open hands. The world doesn't change when you see through illusion, you do. The same faces, the same cities, the same chaos remain. But your relationship with them shifts. You no longer grasp at permanence, and therefore, you no longer suffer its loss. You live lightly, without the armor of denial, aware that every story, including your own, will end, and that this, somehow, is not tragic but magnificent. For in the end, truth is not the opposite of the lie, it is what lies beyond it. The lie gave you direction, truth gives you depth. The lie built your world, truth sets it in motion. And when you can hold both, the dream and the awakening, you finally become whole. That is the freedom hidden inside the lie you needed to survive. It was never meant to protect you from life. It was meant to lead you back to it. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me through the silence between the words. Deep Psyche exists because of people like you. People who are not afraid to look inward, to question, to feel the weight of ideas that most would rather avoid. Every view, every quiet reflection, every moment you spend thinking beyond the surface keeps this space alive. Your time here matters. It tells me that curiosity and courage still have a place in the world. If this journey stirred something in you, share it with someone who is ready to see differently. And if not, let it rest in you a while. Truth often works in silence before it speaks. Until next time, take care of your mind, question gently, and stay awake to the strange beauty of being human.